Matty Healy rose to fame as the pretty boy frontrunner of the popular indie alternative band, the 1975. And as is the case with singers from most bands, nobody really knew who he was personally except for the people that were fans of the band. And this is pretty common with bands. Everyone seems to know the band, but nobody knows who's in the band. Seriously, like name one person from Five Finger Death Punch. You can't. Nobody can. They might not even be a real band. However, Matty Healy has risen to the front of every pop culture magazine in recent months because of his alleged relationship with the very famous Taylor Swift. And I know that this video is slightly out of date because I believe they've broken up since then, but I started working on it before they did, so I figured I would go ahead and finish the video. And everything I'm going to say in it still stands. The only issue with this alleged relationship with Taylor Swift is that Swifties kind of hate him. Like, obsessively.
Holy shit. Wow, he said the thing. Oh my god, that's the name of the video. Hey, isn't that the title of the video?
Actually, in fact, it's kind of wild if you scroll through the Taylor Swift subreddit, and basically all of the posts talking about Matty Healy are saying very unkind things, except for this one post called A Realistic Look at Matty Healy, which has 957 words about why Matty Healy isn't that bad, except it has almost no upvotes and over 500 comments. And trust me, these are not nice comments. And seeing this tremendous amount of hate about a guy that most of the people on this subreddit did not know existed until the rumor of him dating Taylor Swift started to circulate made me wonder, why do these people hate Matty Healy so obsessively? Now, don't get me wrong, he has had his fair share of controversies, and we will cover each one of those in this video as we get to those parts of the story. But it's interesting that so often these arbitrary lines are drawn in the sand in the court of public opinion. And this is usually when Reddit, or more often Twitter, decides someone is bad or not bad, despite nothing about that person really having changed. Some famous examples of this would be like Elon Musk, who was basically the golden boy of the internet for many, many years. And the fact that he posted cringy memes and talked about anime in his tweets was endearing because, boy howdy, he was just one of the boys. But now it seems like everyone online kind of hates him. Sure, he has this little bubble of people that hero worship him, but by and large, he's pretty well mocked by the rest of the internet. And this is despite the fact that nothing has changed about Elon Musk. He's still the same guy tweeting essentially the same stuff. But now people have turned on him, and Twitter has decided that Elon bad. Ellen DeGeneres is another very popular example of someone that a lot of people like. And then over the course of her career, people started to realize that she was kind of a crummy person. And this trajectory of funny to famous to bad is basically what happened with James Corden, and now we're seeing it with Matty Healy. But like, what did he even do? And that, dear viewer, is what I have set out to figure out. Now, there's probably not much to say about Matty Healy that you don't already know. He's the front runner of the band The 1975, which struggled for quite some time to gain momentum. But finally, in 2013, after about 7 years of being together as a band, they finally got their first couple of hits on the radio in the UK. Their album started to rise in popularity, and then finally, around 2016, that's when the band really started to gain momentum with their album I Like It When You Sleep, For You Are So Beautiful, Yet So Unaware of It. And then from there, it was pretty much all on the up and up, at least until today, where they sit as one of the more popular and well-known bands of the current day. And as always seems to happen when someone gets just the smallest crumb of fame, a bunch of YouTube channels and publications start jumping on the bandwagon to try and get just a small shred of their fame as they're rising in popularity. That way, when they're at the top of their fame, people will watch the interviews that these YouTube channels and publications have done in the past. And Matty Healy was no exception. He was on NME, GQ, Pitchfork, Genius, and Chicken Shop Date. And the Chicken Shop Date specifically has 3.8 million views, and all of the top comments, and there are like tens of thousands of them, are people saying how good the episode was, or how funny Matty and Amanda were together. These are all from 6 or 7 or 8 months ago, and there's not really any kind of hatred or animosity towards Matty Healy in the comment section. And that sentiment is reflected in his Genius interview when he talks about the lyrics of his songs. Basically, everyone in the comments is talking about how amazing the lyrics are, or how good looking he is, or how deep his music is, and how it's transformed their lives. And I'm diving into this because it's important to understand that while Matty Healy has had pockets of controversy, all of which we will discuss in this video, by and large, before dating Taylor Swift, he was pretty well liked by the musical community and by the internet at large. It wasn't until he was thrown so far into the spotlight with the relationship with Taylor Swift that public sentiment really started to shift on it. And this is because people now had a reason to specifically try and find faults with him. And as is the case with probably everyone in existence, if you go looking for bad things that people have done in their lives, you're probably going to be able to find them. And Matty Healy was no exception to this rule. Now, I'm not saying that the things he did weren't worth criticizing. They absolutely were. But there's this pattern that seems to happen when anybody becomes famous, where everything they've ever done is suddenly put under the microscope and scrutinized for the sole purpose of finding the bad things in it in order to be able to criticize them for it. And interestingly enough, some people gain controversy over this, like our good friend Matty Healy, but some people are just kind of able to get away with it, like Mr. Beast. Did you know that he tweeted the F slur several years ago? I mean, probably not, because no stink was ever raised about it. Now, whether or not we should forgive someone for their past actions is an entirely different argument. And I think that hinges on what they did in the past and then what they've done in the present in order to change that. But I think it's always important to recognize people who have done bad things in the past and then have made a deliberate effort in order to change themselves and improve themselves in the future. We don't want to trap someone in the role of being the bad guy by punishing them every time they're trying to be a good guy. And this is an issue that we're currently seeing with iDubbbz. See, he's trying to rebrand himself as a good, wholesome, charity supporting content creator, but every time that he does something like that, people will constantly bring up his past and the things he's done and said. But this doesn't really accomplish anything. All it really serves to do is punish someone when they're good for trying to be good. Now, Matty Healy's controversies ironically start with him insulting Taylor Swift back in 2016, when he said that dating her would be emasculating, or at least he kind of said that. He was interviewing with a magazine called Q, and he asked if he had a fear of losing himself should he enter into a relationship with someone famous like Taylor Swift. And he replied, quote, "Yeah, absolutely. The reason I mentioned that is because if I had gone out with Taylor Swift, I would have been, yeah, hell, I am not Taylor Swift's boyfriend, you know? That's also a man thing, demasculating, emasculating thing." Now, through that word vomit, I think what we're seeing here is a pretty classic example of someone saying, I don't want to date someone who is more famous than I am. But also, I don't completely know the entire context around the question or what was going on in the rest of the interview at large, because I could not, for the life of me, find this interview. So maybe he is just straight up saying that dating Taylor Swift would be emasculating. And that is problematic, don't get me wrong. But there's also a possibility that there's a bigger context surrounding this quote, which has just been lost to time because the magazine appears to, I don't know, be defunct or has deleted the interview, and we just won't know what was going on or what else was said. In either case, however, it is worth noting that this is not the only time that him being on an interview has gotten him into trouble. In February of 2023, a rather infamous podcast episode was released featuring him on the Adam Friedland show. And this is one of two main controversies that people point to when talking about why Matty Healy is such a terrible person. And the other one has to do with his Black Lives Matter tweet, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. In the Adam Friedland interview, he was talking about how someone had walked in on him. The issue was that he mentioned that he was jacking off to something called ghetto gaggers, and also later in this video he insulted Ice Spice and made some racially insensitive comments about it. In this interview as well, he also made a joke about jacking off to, quote, fat black women doing yoga, unquote, and that the women would be, quote, pleasantly surprised, unquote. And I'm not usually one to judge edgy or dark humor, but this one kind of confuses me because it doesn't even seem like it's funny. Like, what is even the joke there? I'm genuinely confused. I don't get what we're supposed to find humorous about that. But the main issue people took with this interview was the reference to ghetto gaggers. And I'm going to go ahead and put a content advisory here because it is not good or wholesome or pretty. So if you don't want to hear about this part, which is sexually explicit, then go ahead and skip to this timestamp. So ghetto gaggers is a hardcore site where white men dehumanize and humiliate and roughly have with black women. And I think people being upset about this is a very legitimate criticism. Now, I support expressions of sexuality, and I also fully support whatever you and your consenting partner or partners choose to do in private. But that being said, there absolutely needs to be a line for what we as society deem is appropriate or acceptable content to consume. And that genre of content is absolutely disgusting and needs to be understood as over that line. There's a major difference between I'm into hardcore porn because it's hardcore porn and I'm into hardcore porn because black people and women are being humiliated and dominated by white men. This one is fine. This one is not. But unfortunately, this was not his only race-related controversy. Before, when I said that the Adam Friedland podcast was one of two controversies, and the other one was his Black Lives Matter tweet. During the height of the Black Lives Matter protest, a lot of celebrities were being called on to speak out in support of the BLM movement. But instead of making a specific or unique tweet about the situation, Matty instead made this tweet where he said, "If you truly believe all lives matter, you need to stop facilitating the end of the black ones." And then in this tweet, he gave a link to his song. And this made people really upset because they were saying that he was using the travesty of a black man getting murdered in order to promote his own music. In fact, people got so upset that Matty Healy ended up deleting the tweet, apologizing, and then actually shutting down his Twitter entirely. Now, people who had been obsessively hating Matty Healy because of his past actions continued to do so, and they took this as another reason to continue to do so. They claimed he was using this national tragedy in order to promote his own music. Now, at the time, this was very obviously criticized, but it was also more of what I would consider a closed case incident, where people got mad for a period of time, and then, especially once he deleted his Twitter, people just kind of forgot about it. However, once the podcast episode aired, with the insensitive racial jokes and the references to derogatory against black people, people took that podcast interview in addition with the BLM tweet, and they put that together in order to conclude that Matty Healy is a horrible and racist person. Now, I do think it is a little more nuanced than that, because the song that he posted is actually in support of BLM, but it was actually written about 2 years before the BLM movement was popularized. It specifically deals with police brutality and the murder of minorities at the hands of the police. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't in poor taste or very ill-advised in order to make that tweet, but I do think it was at least well-intentioned and just entirely missed the mark. And also, shortly after tweeting that, he deleted the tweet and then said, I'm sorry, I did not link my song in that tweet to make it about me. It's just that the song is literally about this disgusting situation and speaks more eloquently than I can on Twitter. And that's very close to a reasonable explanation and a good apology. Not that it specifically excuses it or makes the fact that it happened okay, but you can at least appreciate the thought behind it, that he knew he would not be able to articulate his thoughts about the situation in a tweet very well, but he had already done so successfully in a song, and so the logical conclusion was just to direct people to the song to understand his thoughts on the entire situation. And at the time, that was more or less just kind of let go. But people became concerned about this again, primarily because his dating Taylor Swift thrust him back into the limelight. And that, in addition to the podcast episode, gave people a pretty big opportunity in order to call him out as a racist. Now, I would argue that the tweet specifically does not prove that he's a racist. I would say it proves that he's egomaniacal and maybe dumb, but that's not a crime. That's an opportunity for growth. But then you could make the reasonable argument the other way, that between the tweet and the podcast episode, sure, maybe he's not a total racist, but it does exhibit a concerning and problematic pattern about the jokes he makes and the content he consumes. But I would argue this pattern is a pattern of someone who's an idiot, not someone who's malicious. Henlon's Razors famously says, "Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity." And I think we can adequately attribute most everything he's done to stupidity. Not that stupidity doesn't cause harm, but I think this stupidity needs to be viewed as an opportunity for growth, as opposed to an opportunity for punishment. And that's because stupidity doesn't need to be punished. It needs to be taught. And here it really seems like this could have been a potential opportunity for Matty Healy to learn and grow about the situation. But instead of that, people just kind of dogpiled aboard the "you're a horrible racist person" chain. And because of that, any potential opportunity for growth, I don't think is there anymore. Because everyone, like I said, they dogpiled aboard the "you're a horrible racist person" train. And I think that's a shame, frankly, that a public figure that could have learned and grown and been able to spread a more positive and wholesome message surrounding the brutality of minorities will now never have that opportunity. Now, the last real controversy we have to talk about is the Hitler salute. And I will say, this one does seem like it's worth criticizing. In late January, while performing his song "Love It If We Made It," Matty Healy appeared to make a Hitler salute. Now, he did it on the line, "Thank you, Kanye, very cool," and I believe the intention behind it was to mock Kanye West for his anti-Semitic comments, considering that Kanye West has said some interesting things about Hitler.
I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone. I'm done with the classifications. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table, especially Hitler.
But just because something is meant to mock someone does not mean that the action itself is justified. Some of you who have been on the internet for just way too long probably remember when iDubbbz met up with Tana Mojo or Mongo or whatever her name is and used the N-word around her. The objective was both to mock Tana and also to make a point of the fact that using that word is not necessarily okay, even if you think it's an acceptable circumstance. But I think most people would agree that you making a point about something does not justify the things you do in order to make that point. Giving a Hitler salute in order to mock Kanye West is bad no matter how you spin it. And saying the N-word to Tana Montana is also bad, no matter if the purpose was to make fun of and call out her for having used it. But is giving the salute on stage a cancelable offense? I honestly don't really know. But when adding this offense to all the other things that have happened, at least the Taylor Swift fans seem to think that it is. Now, none of these issues on their own have been something that people have gotten hugely up in arms about. Now, I'm not saying they weren't huge because they weren't significant or weren't harmful, but I'm saying they weren't huge because they really didn't last very long or get very big on internet discourse. People were mad for a short period of time, but it didn't really extend beyond that. It was pretty much just viewed as individual pockets of things that were bad and didn't really go anywhere or was really scrutinized much beyond that. But when someone that you absolutely hero worship like Taylor Swift starts dating someone that you think maybe got canceled that one time on Twitter, like Matty Healy, then you run into an interesting issue where people are suddenly much more keen on connecting the dots to try and paint a picture of him being a bad person, especially when that person that's dating Taylor Swift made disparaging comments about her in the past. Dating Taylor Swift gave people outside of the Matty Healy bubble a reason to look into his past and try and find a pattern of bad behavior that they could call out. And in doing so, they arrived at the conclusion that he is a racist misogynist that is not worthy of their goddess, Taylor Swift. And to this end, there were other things that at the time they happened weren't really viewed as controversial, but have since been blown way out of proportion, such as him kissing fans. When realistically, this wasn't that much of an issue because he had consent from the fans, and later, at least one of the fans spoke out in defense of him, saying that they wanted to kiss him. Now, there's probably an argument to be made here about the power dynamic between these two and the fan getting caught up in the moment, but I do think at the end of the day, it is two consenting adults doing consenting adult things. And as such, it's more difficult to find an argument for criticizing that. Frankly, Matty Healy never stood a chance, and it wasn't just because of the questionable things in his past that he had done. People in general did not want Taylor Swift dating someone that they did not love as much and in the same way as they loved Taylor Swift. As soon as he came into the picture, he had already lost. The rhetoric around him started with, "I don't like this guy dating Taylor Swift," and then worked backwards from there to try and find reasons to justify a conclusion that had already been written. And when you start looking for reasons why you specifically don't want to like someone, then you fall victim to confirmation bias, in which you look through all of the things that have happened and you are confirmationally biased towards the bad things, and you pick out the worst moments in someone's life in order to draw a overall conclusion about them. And we know this is true because almost all of the articles about his controversies did not come out at the time of the controversies. You can find references to them in smaller publications, but the bigger story didn't really blow up until very recently. But now they're suddenly everywhere because people are specifically looking for a reason in order to dislike it. And that obsessive hatred brings a lot of clicks and a lot of ad revenue dollars. And so all of the larger publications have all jumped aboard this obsessive hate wagon and are openly criticizing him. Now, this doesn't mean that he's a good person or that he's justified in the things that he did. The porn was disgusting. The tweet was naive, the racist jokes were idiotic, and the Nazi salute was pathetic. But just because he's done something wrong doesn't mean that the fans aren't also wrong. We need to acknowledge that he's done bad things, but we also need to acknowledge that the obsessive hatred of him is weird and very unhelpful. Hating someone for dating Taylor Swift and then claiming the reason for your hating them is all of these things and controversies you found on the internet that you did not care about until they started dating Taylor Swift is a terrible take. So let's finish this out by giving this a good old r/am I the asshole rating and say that everyone here is the asshole. Thanks for watching.